What if the very thing you think is providing security is actually the biggest barrier to fulfilling your purpose? I know that sounds radical, especially if you've been conditioned to believe that a steady job equals God's blessing. But here's what most Christians don't realize about the modern employment system and why it might be systematically limiting your ability to answer God's call on your life. Let me paint a picture that might sound familiar. It's Sunday night, and you're already feeling that familiar knot in your stomach. Tomorrow is Monday, which means another week of sitting in meetings that could have been emails, working on projects that don't align with your values, and watching the clock until you can finally go home. You've been praying for direction, asking God to show you your purpose, but every week feels like more of the same. You make decent money, you have benefits, your family thinks you should be grateful, but something deep inside you knows this isn't what you were created for. The reality is that most Christians today are living what I call the security trap. We've been taught that having a steady job with benefits is responsible stewardship, that entrepreneurship is risky and potentially selfish, and that we should be content with whatever situation we find ourselves in. But what if this conventional wisdom is actually keeping us from the very calling God has placed on our hearts? Here's what I've discovered through years of studying successful people, biblical principles, and the nature of modern work. The traditional employment model wasn't designed to help you fulfill your purpose. It was designed to help someone else fulfill theirs. You're trading the most valuable resource you have, your time, for a fixed amount of money, while someone else captures the majority of the value you create. More importantly, you're trading your freedom to respond to God's calling for the illusion of security. Think about the great kingdom builders throughout history. David wasn't an employee when he built his empire. Solomon wasn't clocking in when he constructed the temple. Paul wasn't working a 9-to-5 when he spread the gospel across the known world. Abraham didn't have a boss when he followed God's call to leave everything and go to a land he'd never seen. These men had the freedom to respond immediately when God called them to move, to change direction, to take risks for kingdom purposes. Now, I'm not saying employment is inherently wrong or that God can't use people in traditional jobs, but I am saying that the modern employment system creates constraints that previous generations of believers didn't face. When your time, location, and financial resources are controlled by someone else's agenda, your ability to respond to God's calling becomes severely limited. Let's talk about the time trap first. The average American spends 40 to 50 hours per week at work, plus commuting time, plus the mental energy spent thinking about work problems during off hours. That's the majority of your waking hours dedicated to building someone else's vision, rather than pursuing the calling God has placed on your heart. Even if you love your job, even if it feels meaningful, you're still constrained by someone else's schedule, someone else's priorities, and someone else's definition of how your talents should be used. But here's what really concerns me about this model. When you're trading time for money in a linear fashion, you're essentially putting a ceiling on your impact. You can only work so many hours. You can only be in one place at a time. You can only serve the people your employer wants you to serve, in the way they want you to serve them. Your generosity is limited by your salary. Your ministry opportunities are limited by your vacation days. Your ability to respond to urgent needs is limited by your boss's approval. The location dependency issue is even more limiting than most people realize. When you're tied to a specific office in a specific city, serving a specific company, you're geographically constrained from pursuing opportunities that might align better with your calling. Maybe God is stirring your heart for missions, but you can't leave because you need the health insurance. Maybe you feel called to plant a church in another city, but you can't move because your job requires you to be physically present. Maybe you want to serve people in different time zones or different cultures, but your work schedule doesn't allow for that flexibility. I've met countless Christians who feel stuck because their job location doesn't align with where they sense God calling them. They're living in expensive cities because that's where their industry is concentrated, but they'd rather be in lower cost areas where their money could go further and their ministry could have more impact. They're missing family events, church activities, and ministry opportunities because their work schedule takes priority. Then there's the financial limitation that most people don't fully understand. When you're an employee, your earning potential is capped by your salary and maybe some modest annual increases. You're essentially putting a ceiling on your ability to be generous, to fund ministry projects, or to take financial risks for kingdom purposes. No matter how hard you work, no matter how much value you create, you get the same paycheck. Meanwhile, the business owner captures all the upside from your efforts. This creates what I call the generosity gap. You want to give more to your church, support more missionaries, help more people in need, but you're constrained by a fixed income that barely covers your own expenses. You're watching others live the kind of generous lifestyle you'd love to have, but you can't see how to get there while trading your time for someone else's predetermined salary. But here's the part that really troubles me about the modern employment mindset. We've been conditioned to believe that job security equals financial security, but that's becoming less true every year. Companies are constantly restructuring, automating, and outsourcing. Industries are being disrupted by technology. The secure job you think you have could disappear tomorrow through no fault of your own. You could spend 20 years building someone else's business only to be laid off when they decide to change direction. Meanwhile, you've been so focused on climbing someone else's ladder that you haven't developed the skills, network, or financial foundation to create your own security. You've become dependent on one source of income, controlled by one employer, in one industry, in one location. That's not security. That's vulnerability disguised as stability. The alternative isn't necessarily quitting your job tomorrow and starting a business with no plan. The alternative is recognizing that true security comes from developing multiple income streams, building valuable skills, creating systems that work without your constant presence, and positioning yourself to respond to opportunities as they arise. When you build multiple income streams, you're not dependent on any single source of revenue. If one stream gets disrupted, you have others to fall back on. More importantly, you have the flexibility to pursue opportunities that align with your calling rather than just opportunities that pay the bills. You can take on projects that excite you, work with people you want to serve, and organize your schedule around your priorities rather than someone else's demands. This is where understanding how money works becomes crucial. Instead of just trading your time for money, you need to learn how to make money work for you. Through trading, investing, and building scalable businesses, you can create passive income streams that generate revenue even when you're sleeping, traveling, or focused on ministry activities. This isn't about getting rich quick. This is about building sustainable financial systems that give you the freedom to pursue your calling without constantly worrying about paying the bills. I've seen this transformation happen in countless lives. People who felt trapped in corporate jobs discovered that they could build profitable trading strategies that generated more income in a few hours than their job provided in a full day. They learned to create online businesses that served people around the world rather than just the customers their employer assigned to them. They developed investment portfolios that provided passive income, giving them the freedom to take ministry trips, support causes they cared about, and respond to opportunities without asking permission from a boss. The key insight is that God doesn't want you to be limited by human systems that constrain your ability to serve Him. He wants you to be free to go where He sends you, to serve who He calls you to serve, and to be generous with the resources He provides. But that level of freedom requires a different approach to building security than the traditional employment model offers. Think about it from God's perspective. If He's calling you to reach people in different countries, but you can't travel because you only get 2 weeks vacation per year, how can you fulfill that calling? If He's stirring your heart to start a ministry that helps people with financial problems, but you don't understand how money works yourself, how can you be effective? If He wants you to be radically generous, but you're living paycheck to paycheck because your income is capped by someone else's budget, how can you obey that calling? The solution isn't to eliminate work or avoid responsibility. The solution is to restructure how you work so that it amplifies rather than limits your ability to serve God's purposes. Instead of trading time for money in someone else's business, you learn to create value that can be multiplied and scaled. Instead of being location dependent, you develop skills and systems that work from anywhere. Instead of having one source of income controlled by someone else, you build multiple streams controlled by you. This requires developing what I call kingdom entrepreneurship mindset. You start thinking like an owner rather than an employee. You look for problems you can solve rather than jobs you can fill. You build systems rather than just completing tasks. You create value rather than just consuming paychecks. You take responsibility for outcomes rather than just following instructions. The beautiful thing about this approach is that it actually makes you more valuable in every context, including traditional employment if that's part of your transition strategy. When you understand how businesses work, how money is made, and how value is created, you become the kind of employee that companies fight to keep. But more importantly, you develop the skills and mindset that enable you to create your own opportunities when God calls you to step out. I'm not suggesting that everyone should quit their job and start a business. I'm suggesting that everyone should develop the skills, systems, and financial foundation that give them the freedom to respond to God's calling without being constrained by the limitations of traditional employment. Some people will transition gradually. Others will make dramatic changes. The key is positioning yourself with options rather than feeling trapped by circumstances. The marketplace is full of opportunities for people who understand how to create value, solve problems, and serve others effectively. The internet has made it possible to build businesses that serve people around the world from anywhere you have an internet connection. Financial markets provide opportunities to multiply resources through wise investing and trading. The question isn't whether opportunities exist. The question is whether you're positioned to recognize and capitalize on them. If you're feeling that tension between your current situation and your sense of calling, that might be God stirring your heart toward greater freedom and impact. The solution isn't to ignore that stirring or resign yourself to being stuck. The solution is to start building the knowledge, skills, and systems that will give you more options. If you're ready to explore how to build multiple income streams that align with your calling and give you location independence, I'd love to connect with you. You can join our Discord community where we discuss practical strategies for transitioning from employee to entrepreneur, or book a coaching session where we can create a personalized plan for your situation.